DC's giant animated movie universe has long been lauded as the best of the best when it comes to adapting superheroes from the comic book onto the animated screen. I remember the days of going to my local city dump, I mean Redbox, and renting these guys for a good watch. Films like Batman Mask of the Phantasm, Batman Under the Red Hood, Flashpoint Paradox, and The Dark Knight Returns Parts 1 and 2 have gotten pretty universal acclaim from fans and critics alike. And while I don't absolutely love all of these, I can completely understand why they were so loved. These films do a wonderful job of staying true to their characters while telling a story that felt like it needed to be told. With superhero cartoons like X-Men and Batman the Animated Series ruling Saturday mornings for kids across the US in the 90s, it was only a matter of time before animated films followed. And sure enough, they did, with Batman Mask of the Phantasm. This was the very first original feature film released by Warner Bros. Animations and the first film of the DC animated universe. This universe was exclusive to DC cartoons of that era, including both Batman Animated Series, Superman the Animated Series, Batman Beyond, Static Shock, This Thing, and both Justice League and Justice League Unlimited. Like I said before, many people call this universe the DC animated universe, but I prefer to call it the Bruce Timm universe, because of the character designs taking after his art style. For me and many others, this universe is what made me a fan of superheroes. Each show had their own characters to explore and connected with the other shows seamlessly. Many of these, more specifically Batman the Animated Series, have been hailed as some of the greatest animated shows of all time, having a wonderful balance for newcomers and established fans alike through its solid animation and writing. The first Batman series was self-contained, meaning it didn't connect with the other shows in any direct way, until of course Superman's cartoon came around, where we got guest appearances from heroes like The Flash and Batman, showing that these shows are indeed part of something bigger. Cut to the DCAU Justice League cartoon, which was the grand culmination of the entire universe beforehand. Finally, we were able to have a cartoon that would officially unite superheroes like Superman, Wonder Woman, and Batman without the sad fact that it's just a one-episode special. No, this is the entire show. Dreams really do come true. Not only was this universe able to offer a wonderful experience on the small screen, but it made grand shockwaves into the comic books too. Fan favorites like Harley Quinn and Terry McGinnis got their starts in these shows, while characters like Two-Face and Jon Stewart were completely revamped, making them much deeper and complex. It's safe to say that in terms of television, these shows stand as some of the most important and successful creative endeavors in DC's entire history. So where does that leave the movies? Yeah, they aren't nearly as groundbreaking, but they do exist. Mask of the Phantasm is easily the most popular out of the few DCAU films that came out, and is the only one that ended up getting a theatrical release. The film is surprisingly enough a love story, and deals with Bruce Wayne encountering Andrea Beaumont, a woman from his past and a brand new enemy, the Phantasm. Now, personally, I've never really connected with this one, which could possibly be because I just never found myself that invested in the main relationship between Bruce and Andrea. I definitely wouldn't label this as bad or anything though, and can totally see why it's as beloved as it is. It's still got Kevin Conroy and Mark Hamill doing their incredible voices for Batman and the Joker, and takes on a pretty mature story that, while I'm not too into it, still respect at the end of the day. The film ended up falling short of breaking even at the box office, which I and many others blame on Warner Bros.' awful lack of marketing for the film. But it ended up finding a pretty major success through its home video release, which I believe set the foundation for what would be DC's confidence in home video animation. The next big film to come out of the DCAU was Batman Beyond: Return of the Joker, which, unlike Mask of the Phantasm, is one I can get behind. The film takes place in the Batman Beyond timeline, where Bruce Wayne has retired the cowl and been replaced by none other than Terry McGinnis, the new Batman. The Joker's also back for the first time since him and Bruce's final encounter, and nobody knows how. I vividly remember getting my parents to rent this for me at the local Blockbuster when those were a thing. They saw a cartoon Batman on the cover and didn't think to check the age rating, which was PG-13. Yeah, I was like 7 at the time, so a lot of the darker parts in the story really stayed with me. Rewatching it now, I figured I would have aged past any things I remembered as disturbing, but lo and behold, this movie's actually kinda messed up. It's no Lars von Trier movie, but the story really doesn't shy away from getting into some pretty dark themes. The most obvious one being what Joker did to Tim Drake in the past. So listen to this. Joker kidnaps a 13-year-old Tim Drake, aka Robin, completely fries and destroys his brain, turns him into a new Joker, forces him to kill, and then uses his body as a vessel to reincarnate in the future. Bruh. It's pretty crazy how the film takes place in the same universe as a kid's cartoon, but that's honestly the best part of it. It feels like a loss of innocence when this moment happens in the film for both Robin and the viewer. It's not a perfect movie, but just like Mask of the Phantasm, it's one that I wholeheartedly respect and admire for how ballsy it is. The DCAU had a few other films released, like Sub-Zero and Mystery of the Batwoman, but I personally feel that Mask of the Phantasm and Return of the Joker were the big ones that really illustrate what the DCAU did in terms of movies. It is a bit odd that there were only Batman films, considering they had access to like every DC character ever in an already established universe, but it's honestly not that bad, considering we have hours and hours of fantastic cartoons with them. After all, people don't really look back on this universe for their animated movies first, nor their shows. Now, before I move on, I should mention Superman Brainiac Attacks, which is a film many believe belong in the DCAU, and while at first glance it could fool even the strongest of nerds, it actually isn't. There are far too many foundational inconsistencies that completely destroy any connections to the DCAU, with the only real similarities being the animation and some of the same voice actors reprising their roles. After some more DC animated films based on cartoons outside of the DCAU, we finally get to what I consider to be the first film of the new era of DC animation, Superman Doomsday. This was the very first film that DC would use their original animated movie logo on, and yeah, I gotta be honest, not a great start. Just like Brainiac Attacks, the animation stayed close to that of the Bruce Timm universe, but had no returning voice actors. The biggest sin this film commits, though, is its sharp deviation from the Doomsday comic book storyline. Now, at the end of the day, I don't care if a film stays true to the source material, so long as it's good, but Superman Doomsday just doesn't do a good job of justifying any changes made from the original storyline. And let me be clear, the original Doomsday storyline is far from high art and very flawed, but it still works as a story. This film pretty much has no sense of the raw emotion that the original had, and instead plays out like a boring episode of the week's Superman story with no real impact. It especially doesn't help that Superman came back to life in the exact same film, making his death all the more weightless. All in all, this one is a bit of a mess, but would act as the first stepping stone in DC's coming age of animation. That's about the only thing that it really has going for it. Now, some of the films that came after were even worse, some about even and some better, but the one that would get even Superman to turn on me if I failed to mention it would have to be Batman Under the Red Hood. Quite possibly the most respected and popular of the entire DC animation lineup. Yeah, just like any of these films, it has its fair share of problems, like how the middle of the movie pales in comparison to the beginning and end, but the story as a whole felt like one that the filmmakers wanted to tell. The plot of the movie revolves around a mysterious figure by the name of Red Hood, taking Gotham's crime into his own murderous hands, with of course Batman not taking too kindly to this. Oh, and Joker's in here too. Major props to John DiMaggio for pulling off a pretty awesome performance as the Joker. This character, especially in the animation world, is pretty hard to pull off because of the insanely high bar that Mark Hamill set in the days of Batman the Animated Series. Here, he really holds his own and completely owns the role. The beginning is as delightfully dark as it needed to be, and the film as a whole does a good job of removing a lot of unnecessary plot that plagued the original storyline. Now, that's not to say there still isn't some here, but it's just been minimized pretty significantly. The best scene in the movie is without a doubt the final confrontation between Jason Todd and Batman, one that feels very emotionally charged and puts the character of the Bat into a complete moral questioning. These are my favorite types of DC stories, ones that really work in changing your view of the character while giving them a new layer of depth. And I think that's what ultimately makes this one a cut above the rest. While I enjoy a good serving of superhero pummeling bad guy, I usually come away with more from a film with deeper concepts like this one. Overall, I can totally understand why this movie is as loved as it is. In terms of the animation era that Superman Doomsday tried to start, this was the one that really proved the worth of these things to me. It was able to tell a story that honored its characters and source material while making the right changes in its translation from comic to film. On the opposite side of that coin, we have an already beloved comic book storyline that was actually downgraded in its translation from comic to film. I'm talking about Grant Morrison's All-Stars Superman. Now, Grant Morrison has always been one of the most interesting writers in DC Comics to me. He's had his fair share of controversial choices, but has also gone on to make some of my personal favorite characters in comic books in DC's entire catalog. The one that many consider to be his crown jewel is, of course, All-Star Superman, a story detailing Superman's final days on Earth as he slowly dies from radiation by the sun. The story works excellently in graphic novel format, with each issue or two going through the various encounters that Superman faces in his last days. However, in the film format, this structure really doesn't work and instead destroys its pacing, making me feel like I'm watching a television show rather than a film. What would have worked much better with this is if DC went all the way and made this an animated miniseries where they'd be able to go much more in depth with each issue and storyline, instead of cramming what they could into a 76-minute movie. After all, the content here isn't anything I'd really be able to call bad, it's just not great in its current format. Hopefully DC comes back to this one eventually and takes a different approach, because the story totally deserves it. By this point in time, DC had established itself as a force to be reckoned with in the home video animation world. Like I mentioned before, Under the Red Hood was a very successful film both critically and financially, and coming films like Justice League Doom and Batman Year One would only go to solidify their respected status. However, the film that I would consider to be DC's magnum opus in terms of animation has to be their adaptation of Frank Miller's 1986 classic, The Dark Knight Returns. DC decided to split this film version into two parts to make way for more space to tell the story. I own the deluxe version of the film, meaning both parts are combined into one. Because of that, I'll be judging it like it's one singular film. Now, The Dark Knight Returns graphic novel is one, like many, that I consider to be a masterpiece in writing. It deconstructs everything that made Batman who he is, and deeply explores the character in a way that feels like both a critique and admiration of his entire history. It's obvious to me that DC understood this and went all the way with this film project. The animation, for one, is a massive improvement from everything before it. It's much more dynamic and does a good job of tributing Frank Miller's original art, which, I mean, look, I love the original comic book art, but even I have to admit, it would not have worked in a full animated movie. The music is quite possibly the biggest jump in terms of quality from the rest. Instead of going the usual grand orchestral battle theme direction that every single one of these goes through, we instead get a slick 80s aesthetic that works perfectly within the universe that Frank Miller's created here. I think its biggest positive here, though, is the fact they didn't mess around and made this thing 2.5 hours, which is unheard of in these DC animated movies. The longest one we had gotten before this was Green Lantern Emerald Knights, which was just an hour and 24 minutes. Having this one be as grand as it is really works in giving the film its much deserved presentation and quality. Of course, this film has problems, particularly with Frank Miller's crazy dialogue and concepts, sometimes not translating that great into a visual film. But regardless of that, this is no doubt DC's best animation effort to date in my opinion. With a lot of these movies, I have to say, hey, this is a great DC animation film, but with this one, I can confidently say that it's just a great film. No strings attached. The Dark Knight Returns acted as DC's last hurrah before they enter their brand new phase, the DC animated movie universe, not to be confused with the DC animated universe.
See why I call it the Bruce Timm universe now?
The DC animated universe is, up until now, their newest animated universe, starting with Justice League: The Flashpoint Paradox, and ending with this year's release, Justice League Dark: Apocalypse War. DC wanted to make their own ever-expanding animated universe, just like they did back in the day, and they decided going the New 52 route would be the best one to take. The New 52 was the name of DC's massive company-wide reboot of their characters in 2011. Heroes like Batman, who were running on over 700 issues, now started all the way back to issue 1. This acted as a new way to get more people acquainted with the comic books, and ended up being a massive success. Now, a lot of people don't like what DC did with the New 52, be it they changed a lot of characters around for the sake of reboot, but I look back on this era fondly. It was how I personally started reading DC comics, so it's safe to say I was pretty excited when they announced this as their new direction for their animated movies. And things were looking even brighter with Flashpoint's release, as it was one of DC's best animated films to date. It was exciting, cohesive, and did a great job of transitioning fans to this brand new animated movie universe.
Things were going in an only upward trajectory for DC animation, and then no. No.
Yeah, DC took a real nosedive after Flashpoint. Their next film, Justice League War, wasn't the worst thing in the world, mainly because it was based on a pretty inoffensive, fun story. But in terms of quality, it was really easy to tell that things weren't heading in any sort of positive direction. The biggest problem I had with this thing was that it felt so unnecessary, like it had nothing to say. A lot of the best DC animated movies have always had some sort of strong or compelling narrative element that made them worth watching. With this film, it was literally just superheroes punching armies of bad guys, and aside from Batman and Green Lantern's funny interactions, I didn't care about anybody. At the time I saw it though, I excused it as being the big entry point for everyone, to get them acquainted with this new version of the Justice League, and while not the most interesting thing in the world, with this out of the way, we can now really get down to some awesome stories.
Yeah, you see this face? This is disappointment.
Okay, this is where my confusion with this entire universe really shows itself. Why is Kevin Conroy, the definitive Batman voice, replaced with an obviously worse voice actor? Why did DC choose to bring in young Damian Wayne, one of the most universally disliked characters at the time of his first appearance? And why? Why did DC not pick one of the countless excellent New 52 Batman stories to adapt instead of this one? Not only that, but they changed the original Batman and Son story for the worse in this one too. And look, this is coming from somebody who considers Damian Wayne to be one of my favorite comic book characters ever, but even I have to admit, he's just not handled well at all, not just in this movie, but the entirety of the DC animated movie universe. The only real development he gets in his appearance in a total of 5 movies is going from wanting to kill to not killing, all the way until the final film of this universe, Justice League Dark: Apocalypse War, where he finally becomes matured in a way that should have already been developed in the last number of films. This lack of consistency is what makes these films' insistency to keep everything in universe all the more frustrating. Take Batman Hush for example, a really cool Batman story that deserved to have a proper adaptation. Instead, we have to force it into this New 52 universe and have major changes to the character of Hush, because establishing Jason Todd would have been too much work to do at this point. Or take the entire character of Shazam, who was introduced in Justice League War as one of the founding members of the Justice League, only to disappear in future movies. These, on top of other events that are apparently resolved off-screen, are what make me have to question why they even chose to go in this direction in the first place. Not to mention that these films aren't very good either, and fail my personal test as to what makes a good DC movie. The fact that these stories don't feel like ones that needed to be told. It's sad, but true. I mean, the only one in this entire entire universe post-Flashpoint that I came out somewhat liking was Death of Superman, the one that wasn't supposed to be good. And I mean, we gotta talk about Apocalypse War, DC's final film in this universe, where they pretty much just kill off everyone for no reason in the most gruesome ways possible, because it has dark in the title.
Okay, so imagine this. Imagine you have a messy room, right? And you have to clean it up. Instead of saying, hey, I'm gonna go ahead and put everything in its right place, instead you go online and buy the Elon Musk flamethrower and burn everything down. Because you just don't care anymore.
Yeah, that about sums it up. The film really tries to hammer home its R rating by showing as much violence and language as possible. But instead of having any impact like they should, we just get sterilized to its excessiveness, to a point where violent deaths to some of my favorite heroes don't affect me emotionally at all. I mean, look, I respect the ambition with this one, but it was ultimately just not pulled off well. And I guess that goes for the entirety of the DC animated movie universe. It just seems like there wasn't a strong enough plan to really propel this universe forward. The quality just wasn't up to the standards that the highs from before had set, and I honestly just don't feel like they have any excuse. The New 52 was filled to the brim with fantastic stories that were either never used or completely butchered, like The Court of Owls, Death of the Family, Endgame, The Trench, The Kill Machine, Forever Evil, and so much more. At the end of the day, it's just kinda disappointing that the universe ended up the way it did. DC is already off to making brand new movies that have no forced connection to the DC animated movie universe, and while I'm most definitely skeptical, at least it looks different, and at this point, that's the most I could ask for. So, DC Animation. It's been quite a ride through their ups and downs, hopefully more highs in the coming future, but I'd be lying if I said I didn't have some fond memories with these things. DC has of course put out other animated films that I didn't get to mention, but for this video, I wanted to give my take on films that I have some sort of personal history with.
Now enough about DC animated films. Let's go ahead and give some love to Marvel straight-to-home video animation. Oh god! Oh god, no! No! No, I'm not gonna torture myself with that.